Good evening, ladies. Good evening. As we wait for everybody to join us, why don't you go ahead and type in your favorite female figure in history? And if you want to, the indigenous land or where you're calling in from tonight. So we're just waiting for everybody to join. So if you want to type into the chat, any favorite female figure in history. Let's see. I'm typing in Joan of Arc. There we go. Hypatia? I don't know how to say that. Hypa.
Hypatia.
Hypa. Say it again.
Hypatia.
Okay.
Hypatia. It's Greek.
That's a new one for me. Thanks, Denise, for that. All right. All right. I think we've probably got everybody joining us that have joined in tonight. So I'm going to get started. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Community Conversations produced by Midwest Women's Herbal. Let's see. I'm Sherry Ralish. I'll be your hostess this evening. In case you're not familiar with Midwest Women's Herbal, we're a women-led and women-empowered organization. We've been producing herbal and personal growth events, both in person and virtually, for over 13 years. To find out more, visit our website, midwestwomensherbal.com. We're delighted that you're with us for tonight's free community conversation, Uncovering Ancestral Women, a Historian's Journey, with historian Max Dashu and herbalist Linda Conroy. I'm happy to have other coordinating team members on tonight's call. Give everyone a wave, ladies, so they know who you are. I don't know who I can see. I see Ashley, so we've got some of the team members. I know Courtney's here. So Ashley Oman and Courtney Hanson will be handling our tech support. So if you find yourself with any audio visual glitches, send either one of them a chat or email herbwomen@gmail.com. And thanks to all the coordinating team members who are part of the team and for your support tonight. We like to begin our events by reading our mission and vision statement. So please welcome Ashley.
Hello, everyone. All right. So the Midwest Women's Herbal Mission Statement is Midwest Women provide herbal education and opportunities for transformation. Immersed in the tradition of the village herbalist, grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters, and children gather in a co-created village. Through the earth-centered healing and nourishment, we ally with the plants that grow around us. From the ground up, we connect to weave ourselves, our families, and our communities into the dynamic spiral of health. And the Midwest Women's Herbal Vision Statement is we live in a world where the feminine is honored, respected, where women stand fully in their power, acknowledging their wisdom, skills, and innate healing ability. Thank you. I'll pass it back over.
Thanks, Ashley. In the coming days, we'll be sending you some emails with special offers. We want to make sure you receive them. So we know sometimes emails can go into spam. So to avoid this, you can add our email or women Gmail to your contacts, or after tonight's conversation, reply and say hello to the email we'll be sending out with some coupon codes. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors who make hosting events like this possible: Moonwise Herbs, Mountain Rose Herbs, Frontier Co-op, Host Defense Mushrooms, Goodland Creative, Red Earth Herb Gathering, Wisconsin Mycological Society, the Driftless Folk School, Wisconsin Public Radio, and Natural Awakenings Magazine. If you're interested in learning about sponsorship opportunities, please visit midwestwomensherbal.com. And our tech support is putting all these links into the chat, so you can follow along there. At Midwest Women's Herbal, we believe learning should be accessible year-round. We bring a variety of virtual learning experiences directly to you. We invite you during the winter months to join us for the In Our Own Hands Women's Wellness Series. This series will cover a wide range of topics, including women's wellness, the healing power of herbs and fungi, client advocacy, and much more. The registration link will be posted in the chat. Workshops for In Our Own Hands Wellness series are held via Zoom. They're 3 hours in length and occur every other Saturday. Please note, early bird pricing ends December 5th. Our guest tonight, Max Dashu, is presenting Pagan Herbal Traditions of Europe on February 15th, and we'll touch later on that in tonight's call. The Herb Women Classroom, another virtual learning opportunity, provides a rich selection of on-demand workshops that you can enjoy all year long. Whether you're looking to explore new topics through our expertly crafted courses or revisit past workshops from our conference recording archive, there's always something new to discover. Every course module comes with a monthly community Q&A live on Zoom with our own herbal educator, Linda Conroy. We are incredibly excited to announce the Herb Women Classroom will soon be offering a subscription option that will grant access to the amazing learning modules and programs. It'll be a really great place to deepen your herbal and personal growth journey. We're also very elated to announce registration opens next week for the 14th Annual Midwest Women's Herbal Conference, and we're honored to welcome Robin Wall-Kimmer, Gail Faith Edwards, and Dr. Cornelia Cho as keynote speakers. At the end of tonight's conversation, we'll give away one registration for the full In Our Own Hands series and a signed copy of Max's book, Women in Greek Mythography. If you need to be present to win, so be sure to stay until the end. And as a really special gift and thank you for everyone on the call tonight, everyone will receive a special gift, Chapter 3 from Max's book, Witches, Pagans, Women in Your... I think the chapter is Names of the Witch from Witches and Pagans, Women in European Folk Religion. And just as a reminder, please keep all questions and comments in the chat focused on tonight's topic. All right. At this time, I'm honored to introduce Linda Conroy, visionary and founder of Midwest Women's Herbal and owner of Moonwise Herbs. Linda is a bioregional herbalist who has been practicing and teaching herbalism for over 30 years. Linda offers in-person and virtual apprenticeships. I'm grateful to have spent time with Linda as an apprentice and intern, and those experiences inspired me to join the Midwest Women Herbal team. I'd also like to share from our entire coordinating team that we appreciate Linda's unwavering support for us individually, her steadfast commitment to promoting women's health and well-being, and her vision to create and hold a container for all of the events Midwest Women Herbal produces throughout the year. I learned about Max Dashu's work while apprenticing with Linda, and I'm thrilled she agreed to join us tonight. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Shari. And thank you again to the team. We have an amazing team of women, and we always say our events are women-powered. So here we are in a women-powered space. And I am so delighted that Max agreed to meet with us this evening and to be a part of our Women's Wellness Series this winter. I contacted her a couple of years ago, asking her to come to our conference in person, and that was during the pandemic times, and she was hesitant to come out into being in an in-person situation. So now we get to be with her here, and hopefully in the future in person, because we would just love to be in the flesh with you, Max, at some point. I found Max's work by looking around on the internet myself. My work is very steeped in promoting women's health and well-being. And when I saw the Suppressed Histories archives, it really spoke to me, because there's so many pieces of history, of women's history, that's missing and that we don't get privy to and we don't have reflected back to us. And having the work that is in the archives reflected back to me, and being able to see all the diversity and all of the women's history throughout the world just really speaks to me and has spoken to me. And so I'm just delighted tonight to focus on Max's journey and how she came to dedicate her life to this, how she came to be inspired to start this collection in 1970. Many, many years ago. I was 6 years old. That long ago. And so I'm just really excited to talk to you, Max, about your journey. And I want to read your bio for the women who aren't familiar with you. I know it's a little dry when you read a bio, but I don't want to miss anything that is here. So I'm going to read this, and then we can get into our conversation. So about Max. Max Dashu founded the Suppressed Histories Archives in 1970 to research and document women's history globally. from the most ancient times to the present. She teaches with images from the cultural record and is internationally known for her expertise on goddess iconography, mature cultures, and female spheres of power, medicine women, witches, and the witch hunts, and how patriarchy, conquest, and systems of domination develop and intertwine. Her books include Witches and Pagans, Women in European Folk Culture, 700 to 1100, and Women in Greek Mythography, Pythias, is it Pythias? Pythias, Melius, and Tirinides. She has produced 2 DVDs, Women Shaman, The Ancients, and Women's Power and Global Perspective, and many access videos on her YouTube channel. So go there, please, because the visuals are amazing and the stories. A land witch, enchantress, and independent scholar, Max blogs daily on her Suppressed Histories page on Facebook. So I encourage you, if you don't already, to follow her on Facebook, followed by more than 250,000 people internationally. And thank goodness, because following this information is really powerful and critical. So welcome, Max, to this space. And I'm so excited to be with you tonight. Thank you for
Thank you, Linda. Thank
Mhm.
you for having me.
So delighted and so honored. And I wanted to start out our conversation asking if you could tell us what exactly the Suppressed Histories Archives is, a short version, and what your vision for it is.
Sure. You know, when just before I dropped out of college in the end of 1969, I was just really profoundly in touch with the intensity of patriarchy and racism in the world that I was living in. And I felt like I really wanted to know how things came to be the way they are, and to try to analyze that, to try to get a historical perspective on it. And at that point, women's history was literally a joke. And there was no women's studies at that point. And so I left school to become an independent scholar. And I did not think I was going to start an archive, but I did know this one thing, which was that anything that I was going to try to say about women's history, and it had to be very global, was going to be challenged. And I would have to document everything. I needed evidence for everything, because it was every bit of it would be challenged. Anything that countered the dominant narrative of male supremacy since the beginning of time, and basically the male superiority and female inferiority, all of the unconscious scripts that our culture is so loaded with would have to be documented. I needed proof. And so at that point, I was just reading everything I could lay my hands on. And it was very expensive at that period. We were all penniless feminists in the early 70s. Photocopies were expensive. I didn't yet know photography, and so that came a little bit later. But I just began gathering information, and what was available, because that was card catalog days, that you would look under women in the card catalog, and you would find marriage, family, mothers, fashion, all these stereotypical types of things. And if you tried to look under matriarchy in the card catalog, there was hardly anything, right? And so there was nothing digital. It was a completely different world at that point. And so my goal was kind of inchoate, but it was just to really gather knowledge in a really global way. Because what we were exposed to of women's history was Queen Elizabeth I, Susan B. Anthony, certain usual suspects, overwhelmingly European descended. And that was a very narrow view of the world. And so it was very clear to me initially that there had to be a very international view. The lens had to be global. And Indigenous women were an important starting point, because the empires are based on domination. So you have a class domination, you have slavery and conquest and all of those things. And I just intuited that Indigenous societies were going to be a place where, if there was any freedom for women anywhere in the world, it was going to be in those cultures that were not ranked by other means. And so that search just began. And I've kind of lost track to some degree. If I'm not sure if I'm totally answering your question, but that was the philosophical starting point for me, was to see, are there any societies that do not have domination-based cultures? And where are they, and what do they look like? And at that time, you have, I'm just beginning at the very beginning. And so there's these coffee table books that you could find in libraries, The Dawn of Man, Time Life books, this kind of stuff, and big color plates with kings and generals and male philosophers and all of that kind of stuff. And the women are like completely missing in action, except maybe there's an occasional queen or concubine. And so that was very discouraging, but I began to discover there would be little black and white photos, really just marginalized, of ancient female figurines. So I began looking in the archaeological record. And here's the thing about women's history. You cannot do women's history just by reading documents, because those are all created by the male elite and the societies that even have written traditions, have alphabets or hieroglyphics or whatever. So, and a lot of those are dynastic as well. And so it has to be interdisciplinary. You have to look at archaeology. You have to look at indigenous orature, linguistics. There's a lot of deep history that we're getting out of linguistics of who the peoples were and where they moved and what happened to them. And now we have the genome studies. So it's constantly a process of a synthesis to try and reconstruct. And one of the things I found is some of the most interesting things, most powerful women's culture was found in, you had to kind of go into the corners, not the broad cultural narratives, because you would not find the women there. It's a little better now than it was in 1970 or even 1980. There's more and more books being published, including by Native women authors about their own traditions. But I've lost my train of thought now. To be able to integrate this knowledge, to do a synthesis, and to get sort of an overall picture of women's standing. And so one of my initial points of departure was looking for matrilineal societies. Just before I dropped out of college, one of my professors at Harvard, I got a scholarship to Harvard, and they were like, well, there are matrilineal societies, but it doesn't mean anything. It's completely insignificant, because all societies from the beginning of time have been male dominated. And this was just an article of faith. You were considered a nutcase and a quacko if you tried to see anything about matriarchy or any kind of other social system other than what we know, with the developed nations, as they're calling them, at the top. And then, all kinds of horrible racist words to describe the societies that were Aboriginal societies didn't count for anything. And so, I just really wanted to overturn all of those narratives. And what I found more and more is that was in those non-state societies that you would find matrilineal cultures, mother right cultures, what I'm coming now to call matricultures, or even mother-law societies. And both the Haudenosaunee women, the Iroquois women in northeastern America, and also the Minangkabau people in Western Sumatra, both use the same term of mother-law to describe their own societies. They're matrilineal, they're matrilocal, they're focused around women at the center. And so in Sumatra, they call it adat ibu, mother-law. And I think that, this is helpful, because for a long time, it was really a battlefield around matriarchy, right? And in academia, they're all screaming, well, matriarchies don't exist. There are no societies where women dominate men. And that last part is right. There aren't any societies like that. But that's the wrong definition,
Right. I was going to ask you, because I think, because we have been indoctrinated into a patriarchal culture and patriarchal thinking, sometimes when people say matriculture or matrilineal, that in our minds we turn it into matriarchy, and it isn't the same. And I'm wondering if you could maybe define the matrilineal,
okay.
and give a concrete example of what that looks like.
Right. I can pull up a slide a little bit later where I have a whole set of attributes And so this has been a battlefield, and I've tried using other words just to avoid that argument, but you still always end up having to define. So one of the core principles of patriarchy is control of women's sexuality and procreative power and labor. So to do that, they impose descent in the male line. And in order to do that, all these female punishments. So you've got stoning and female seclusion and all the, in an egalitarian society, the mother line is important because it's a more stable form of social organization, because you don't have to control anyone. Everybody knows children come from the mother. It's observable. And there's an African-American proverb that says, mama's baby, papa's maybe, because you can't necessarily know in order to uphold those dominant male dominant systems. So you have matrilineage, which is descent through the mother. You very often have matrilocality, and that may even be more important in real terms. What that means is that when you have heterosexual relationships, and they may or not be even called marriages, or there may be sequential marriages, then they stay near the woman's kin. And this is a built-in protection that is of great significance, because she's got all of her relatives around her. She's not a stranger amongst hostile patrilineal kin, right? The in-laws who will allow her husband to beat her up, and there's no one there to defend her, this kind of stuff. It's more stable also because human relationships, we all know this, unless you lock women into a marriage like the Catholic Church does, then marriages break up. And, in the United States, over 50% end in divorce. And so then what about the stability of that for that child? If you have a woman-centered kindred that is not the nuclear family, but a whole group of generations, you actually have something also that's called social motherhood. And this is extremely important because the whole burden of child rearing is not on a single woman all by herself, but you have a whole generation of sisters and brothers who are part of the network. You've got the elders in the generation above them. Below them, you have the next generation coming up. And so childcare is shared. Care of elders and disabled kin is shared, right? So that's social motherhood, and that's extremely important. And going along with that also is the idea of whatever land or house or things pertaining to life support are communitarian. In the Marxists would call it, the original communal society or something like that. But nobody owns. There's no male primogeniture, so one descendant of the father gets to control everything and everybody else. But it becomes much more, everybody is engaged in the collective thing, and you have elders that have the most experience, who have a certain amount of authority, but there's flexibility in that. And there's much more room for the people who really have ability and knowledge, and who, the mothers do so much work. And in our society, they have no power. They're completely tied down with responsibilities and obligations and weight, unpaid labor, and nothing to show for it. They have no control. It's all control from the male legal and the corporate and this economy that's not based on the life support system whatsoever. So that's really important, because in a matriculture, then the authority belongs to those who do the work. And in fact, the women sustain the life support system. And that includes the water, bringing in the firewood, raising the food, or gathering the food, whatever their economy is based on. That all accords respect and authority to them. And then there's spiritual aspects. You have the veneration of the divine female, the ancestral woman in many societies, or goddesses, or land spirits. There's the relationality of the mother line goes beyond just the human kindred. You have the relation to land, to water, to stone, to forest. And there are different kindreds. And so there has to be also a way of relating to other kindreds, and an aesthetic, that's not the right word, an ethic of non-aggression, ideally. Because aggression and warfare and raiding lead to patriarchy. I mean, they are part of patriarchy. So that, this is against the life principle. So all those things are factors. And I can pull up a slide later on and talk a little bit more. There's probably some other I'm forgetting about. And
Do
so
you, are there living examples today that you could point to where there is still the matrilineal approach is still in practice?
yeah,
Is
I
places
think there are. And so famously people will point to the Moswa in southwestern China, the Minangkabau in Sumatra. There's other matrilineal societies in that region. The Vanuatu people, a little island way, way, way off the coast of Australia. The Pueblo peoples, the Iroquoian peoples. There are lesser known groups. Actually a lot of matrilineal societies in North America. And so like, the Wichita people and some of the Caddoan people had matrilineal systems, matrilocal systems, the Iroquoian people, the Cherokee included in that language family. And in South America, there are the Yanawawa, I can't say it, Yawanawa people. In Venezuela, there are some of the peoples in the eastern Amazon flank of the Andes. There's quite a few examples of this, but the thing we have to understand too is that European conquest on a global level has colonized the whole world. And so you have these processes of conquest, land seizure, genocide, and also the imposition of European, not only the law codes, but the religious systems, which has impinged. So for example, the Tuareg would be another example in Africa. There are numerous African societies that have historically been matrilineal, but there are very few. I can't name anybody who has not been impacted by the external powers that be at this point. So for example, in the Minangkabau society, they have been Islamicized in the 1600s. And that has continued to have, initially they're resisting the patrilineage that's built into the Quran, all kinds of very strong patrilineal codes and polygyny and things like that. And so the Minangkabau people kept their Adat Ibu, but the prestige of Islam has grown, and it's a scriptural religion. So they've got like a rule book, whereas the oral tradition has been impinged upon by the fact of, what's happening in the world and the overall international politics, so that there are things that are patriarchal that are now incorporated into that society. And so this is true in varying degrees for a lot of different cultures. So what I'm trying to say is this is really complex. It's difficult to generalize. There's so many intertwining factors.
absolutely.
And there's the way that the imperial conquests of the last 500 years, or even the last 1,000 years, if you look at the traffic in enslaved people that in Africa and also in the Americas, that those factors are patriarchalizing factors. Those historical forces push patriarchy in various ways. And so, this is very much entangled, all of this.
So, Max, I have a curiosity. When you talked, I'm going to back up for a minute. You talked about, dropping out of college and starting this project. And when I heard you say that, it also reminded me when we spoke yesterday about the lens that we see things through. And we spoke about Maria Gambutes and how, she was an archaeologist who saw things a certain way and wasn't honored by her colleagues and was even ostracized. And for your journey, I'm wondering if you leaving college was an important component of you being able to take this lens and walk with
Absolutely. It was, I could not stay. I could not survive as a being and stay in that setting. It would have irrevocably forced me to, it's like the doctrines that are embedded, that are patriarchal and colonial, all of these, the racialized lens, all of it was, I was aware of it, but I didn't feel like, as a lowly undergraduate, how could I fight the professors? Right. And I saw enough. This is why I left. And of course, 1969, everything was blowing up, the anti-war movement. There was so much going on that I was politically involved in. But, you know, I could see that it was going to be impossible to pursue this line of research in that setting, you know, because there was just like the impulse to tear it all apart, you know, that they would tear apart the investigation that I wanted to do. And I just didn't feel like I could withstand that battering. And that's why I just decided I'm going to strike on my own and just start looking. And I didn't think of it at that moment in these terms, but what I'm really doing is scanning the cultural record and looking for evidence, you know. And this is, you know, in many societies, we only have the iconography, right? We don't necessarily have inscriptions. We, you know, and we may have more recent, we don't have the ancient history, but we have the native orature is a primary historical record. So that has to be integrated. And then there are the historical records, and we have to look at those too, because in the corners of those imperial records, you know, including the Greeks and the Romans, but the Chinese, any of the literate societies that became world dominating forces, there are bits of testimony about some of the peoples that they colonized, and these strange people that have women chiefs, right? And so I'm starting to find these examples, and it really became more and more apparent that although you have queens in Europe or, you know, some other parts of the world, some of the African queens, for example, that are in more ranked societies, it's a different order of magnitude in terms of the on the ground flesh and blood authority of women inside the matricultures. You know, that it was because it's not a social hierarchy in the way that we've been taught was somehow supposed to be the sign of a developed, you know, this whole thing about development is totally colonial. And so, you know, what I was doing after a while, I began to think about it in terms of pattern recognition. So here's an example with, you know, I was finding a lot of stories in the library, it would be under anthropology, it would be under ethnology. That's where you would find these oral traditions of native peoples in South America or Eastern Africa or wherever. You know, it wasn't under history at that point in time. And so I would be finding examples of women who led resistant movements against colonization. And a lot of times they were seers, diviners, priestesses, prophetic women. They were spiritual leaders who, you know, their purview as protectors of their people then necessarily included leading a resistance against invasion. Or maybe the conquest had already taken place and then they did an uprising against it, you know. And so this was a pattern that was in the information I was finding, that gradually I would begin to see, wow, there's something here. Or another example would be in looking at the symbolism in some of the iconography, and you would see women with a distaff in their hand. So this is a spinning wand, right? You pull off the unspun fibers to spin. And so in a lot of parts of the world, the distaff or any of the implements having to do with weaving had sacred valence. They were not purely technological or economic, but they were really much more in this integrated worldview where the things you do to create the life support system, whether it's clothing in the sense of weaving, or whether it's anything involved in food production or pottery, you know, going down to the clay mother and praying to the clay mother before you collect the clay in order to make pottery, so that the spiritual and the economic can be integrated. And we could also say that the spiritual and the political are integrated. So this is something that was the Western Civ worldview tries to atomize everything off into separated categories, as if everything is not related. And so part of this is we have all these ripped webs of culture, particularly those of us who come out of patriarchal heritages. You know, they tore it up. They tore up the web of culture. And in my investigations into European heritages, ancestral heritages, this was very clear, because actually spinning and weaving were really integral to not to just women's power and authority, but to the idea even of the female prophet, that ceremony was done with the spindle or with the distaff. In Scandinavia, the völler a word that actually translates as staff women, they found burials of women with these distaffs, and there's a certain shape to the distaff in from like Scotland all the way to Egypt that has this kind of like little, they call it a bird cage. It has a little thing that you can wrap it's just a straight shaft, and it has a thing you can wrap the linen or the wool or whatever around, and you pull it down to spin with. So these Norse seeresses had these staffs, and they found women buried with the ones that were iron because the wooden ones disintegrated. And so this is like the ancestor of the witch's wand in a sense. So we begin to see these connections of things that are in the European orature about witches and witches' wands. And they found women who were buried with crystal balls hanging from their belts, and sometimes also a sieve hanging from their belt. And we know from just a whole body of cultural testimony that sieves were dangled as a pendulum. Even in modern times in Hungary, they would take these giant sieves that are like baskets almost, and they would hang them, and they would ask questions, and they watch how the sieve moved. So there are all these spiritual practices tied together with things that were everyday objects. We could think about the witch's broom. There's just so many examples. Mirrors and fans. In African societies, you've got the sacred fan or the herb bundle. Just so many things. So
I know, I'm hearing you say that as you were looking, and you are looking, that you're looking for patterns that repeat themselves. And that's been fascinating to me, studying on a more peripheral level, just goddess archetypes from around the world, and seeing the similarities in energies and the expression, and just how those patterns are there over and over and over again, and that it's a universal energy, it seems to me, that happens even though some of the expression is different. It's something that you can look for. And I'm curious, for you looking for these things and going into those corners, how do you train your own eye to look for those things and be able to pull them back and make them available to us? Because that's such a skill that you've honed.
well, at first I was really looking for very specific things, and then I had to broaden my lens wider and wider to see, well, okay, maybe there's more under this, right? Because, I was looking for the ancient female figurines, and that to me was a marker of some kind of importance, the divine woman in some sense, and the male archaeologists are all going, oh, those are dancing girls, those are sex objects, those are pornographic things, they're dolls, they're all anything that they could do to trivialize those. But you know what? Nobody buries porn with the dead. Okay. And that funerary context is one of the primary ways that they found these figurines, they're not in all societies, but there is a global pattern of it. And so that's an example. But there's so many different angles to consider with this. But I'll give you an example. When I decided the second DVD I put together is called Woman Shaman the Ancients. And I basically wanted to look at medicine women, or, there's all these different names, we have all the different cultural names that we have to sort of encompass with this, but there are these recurring patterns. And so what I was doing is I was going through the digital archives that I have and looking for, okay, well, what are I just gathering JPEGs basically and putting them into folders. And it's like, okay, here's a bunch here. And I wanted the view to be international. I didn't want to go country by country, but just to look at international patterns. And so there were some I didn't anticipate because I'm just gathering these JPEGs and I'm discovering, wow, there's this whole thing with staffs. I mean, what I just said to you about the witch's wand, this is one pattern that Europeans will recognize, but there were all these different cultural traditions, women with a staff. There were Lakota women with a staff that were on the winter count paintings from the reservation period. There were women with staves in China and, the Scandinavians that I told you about, and African examples. And so that became a whole chapter in the video that I hadn't even really thought of, because, it was just like, once you begin to gather things and then compare them, you see patterns. And I spent a lot of time meditating on maps. Because it's like if you take the map of the world, they put the north at the top and the south at the bottom, and they really do think about it as up and down. But the earth is rolling through space. And it was incredibly meaningful for me. So like I would turn the map upside down. So the Indian Ocean would be at the top. And you could see how East Africa related to Yemen and over around to Pakistan and India. You could see how the Malays wound up traveling over to Madagascar. You could see interrelationships. So if you look at North America and you look at it in that way, then you can understand that why the Caribbean is a cultural sphere of its own. And you start to see those interrelationships, because it's not only about the cultural symbols or themes that we've been talking about, but it's also about the history of peoples. And that's where the linguistics comes in handy. This is where you begin to be able to track where people came from and, migrations and conquests. And that's all part of the picture too, is the politics of it. And finding out, okay, well, let's drill down, because who are really the Aboriginal people in this picture, if we go back in time.
So I'm curious, in terms of you, starting this journey and collecting and starting to notice things, what early on, how did you start to bring that into your community and share the information? And in that, this will be multiple questions. So how has that changed over time? So the first question being about how did you start to bring it out and to share it? And then how has that changed over the course of the years that you've been doing this work?
That's a very insightful question. At the beginning, all I had was a few photocopies and a bunch of written notes. And when I moved out to the West Coast, and I was in the lesbian feminist community, it was just an incredible cultural ferment going on, in the East Bay, especially East Bay, Berkeley, Oakland. And so some of the women I met there, we had like households. There would be women's collectives that were like shared houses, because we're all subsisting on nothing basically. And so one of the houses was Terrace Street House, where Judy Grahn and Wendy Cadden lived, the founders of the Oakland Women's Press Collective and Women's Place Bookstore. And so I had, through them, I got in touch with this woman, Donna Deitch, who was down at UCLA, and she was in the film school. And she wanted to do one of the first feminist documentaries as her MA project. And so I met her through them, and I went down and stayed with her in Venice, and we went around to UCLA and USC, and basically a bunch of us, I was kind of like guiding the research, and it's like, looking through books in the university libraries, looking for images of women's history. And so this is how I came to know the Jamon culture. We were looking at Peru. We were looking at all this, ancient Egyptians, ancient China, all these places, and gathering images, taking slides of them. So this is how I got started working with the images. I would not have gone for photography on my own, and slideshows kind of sounded sort of dull in a way, but I immediately saw the power of the images. And so I wound up from doing that. I made a couple trips down there, and we wound up with about, 350 slides. And she gave me copies of all of them, which was a really good thing, not only for me and the seedlings of the archives, but also because her studio burned down, and eventually she lost all of her stuff.
Wow.
So then I had these slides, and I started doing slideshows. So this was like 1973, 1974 at a Woman's Place bookstore. That was the first one I did. And we did it multimedia. So we had Kay Sato, Sandy Ajita on drums. Because it was Kay playing the koto, Cynthia Fitzpatrick with flute. We're doing music background, because women really wanted to experience the feeling of these images, which we had been systematically deprived of. The gatekeepers, it wasn't just that it was like a conspiracy. They weren't interested in it. They didn't think it was important, but they were also threatened by it. And so there was like a complicated set of factors, but multiple gatekeepers control what we would see. Certainly not in our textbooks, not in the Dawn of Man kind of books. not in our university courses. This was all at the margins of the cultural record that had to really be excavated out. And so I had one slideshow to start with, and I called it Matriarchives. And then it kind of grew because I'm adding more material. I got a camera, got a copy stand. I started doing this on my own. And so then it became 4 slow shows, and then it began fissioning out. So all of this is happening in the feminist community, especially the lesbian feminist community, radical feminists, women's coffee houses, women's bookstores. So there was like the Full Moon Coffee House in San Francisco. There was, I think it was called Mother Right in Santa Cruz. There was one in Portland. I can't remember the names off the top of my head. And so like I'm traveling up, up and down the West Coast and just sort of like doing these informal events and showing slides. And I didn't even have a projector for a long time. It was just kind of really seat of the pants. But the thing about it was very powerful because women could see what they instinctively knew had to be there somewhere. We all suspected there's more to all of this than what we've been shown. It's been withheld for whatever reasons, and there were many. To see a really global view, and not the usual kind of like US history kinds of, Betsy Ross or any of that stuff, but to really go down into looking at women who had authority in their societies, who had public office in their societies, publicly recognized leadership, women who spoke, women who were warriors, who led political movements, labor movements, revolutions, indigenous sovereignty leaders, all of those groups and more. I mean, some of the images were things like priestesses from Dahomey who are doing, like there's this one slide, I still love it. It's a black and white photo, and it's a fawn woman dancing. And it's like the dynamism of it, the power of it is tremendous. And just looking at these photos, or of women drummers, in West Africa and in other places, and you see this is a whole other scope of expression and action for females that we did not see. It was not shown to us. It was foreclosed to us psychologically that we could not even begin to imagine cultural worlds in which women could be powerful in those ways. And then the other part of the story too is, we talk about this more, but just briefly, that, what were the systems of domination that were put in place, and how did they tie women down and bind women down and seclude and constrain women in all the many ways. So anyway, I was traveling around to some extent and doing these slideshows. I got the copy stand, and maybe this is a good time because what you're asking really leads into what I wanted to share with you all in the images. So I'm going to go ahead and do the share screen here. Just give me a second here to get this up. There we go. Yeah. So close my video thing so let's see the controls. Oh well, too bad. All right, yeah. So just really to do a global view. And that includes rock art, it includes seals in gold or bronze or clay, it includes megaliths and ceramic painting, and even also more recent historical documents, like some of the paintings that we see here along the bottom row. We've got an Iroquoian woman, a woman from Burma, one of the Aboriginal peoples in Burma. Here is a Quechua woman in Peru, the very little known Eurasian peoples that don't ever get in history books, and Afro-Brazilians. So, really to just get, what does the world look like if we have a really global perspective? And so we're going into the archaeology. There's gold figurines, there's ceramic and stone figurines. We've got Egyptian murals, the Nok ceramics, just all kinds of things. Here's a red flint clay sculpture from the Cahokia culture. These native North American archaeologies have been almost entirely withheld from us until the last couple of decades when they're talking about history. And so we really need the entire cultural record. And, as I was saying, a lot of this is iconographic because we don't have written records from Angola pre-Portuguese and Dutch invasion, right? but we have the rock galleries of the Sahara and of Australia. And so this is really just looking at various kinds of sculpture, and you have the breast gold plaque breast pendants of the Chibchan peoples in northern Colombia, matrilineal societies, just all of this, and the goddess iconography, the life giver symbolism, the breast pots, all of this, the female figurines. Here's Greenland, here's Utah, there's Nigeria again, here's Costa Rica. And so all of this has been withheld. And so the idea is to recover this, and all of this down here. Some of these are banners that I've created. The Suppress Histories website is now undergoing we're going to reconfigure everything. And we're going to put the 10,000 photo essays that are on the Facebook page, which I invite you to visit, Suppress Histories Archives on Facebook. These are banners, navigation banners that will show people how to explore the site. And one of the pages, for example, is the ceramic paintings and rock art showing women dancers from all over the world. But here's some of, this is the oldest brochure, the name Matriarchives that I mentioned before. And I thought matriarch and archives, it kind of works. And then this is the series that I did at the Woman Space. It was a coffee house that had, like, not every night, but some nights of the week, they would have women's events, feminist events. So Z Budapest was there and various different people. And this is the point at which I was saying, there were 4 regional shows at that point in time. And look at this. This is so typical. Make it really, really cheap so all the poor women can afford it, and childcare provided. And that became less viable as time went on. And so this was a presentation that up till then, they were all regional. And I was trying to really go chronologically from the oldest things I could find and then go forward in time and show the changes that took place in that region. This is the first one, and it was hard because it was slides and I didn't have any money. So duplicating slides was out of my reach. And so if I took slides out of one show, then they couldn't be in the other show. So there was that kind of thing, but I knew I needed to do these more topically because I didn't really have enough at that point to do a really in-depth regional history. And so this was the first one that I did like that. And then there were others. These are all regional shows. And at this point, I was doing graphic design for a living for a little while there. And so it was all calligraphy. I couldn't afford typesetting, and so here's one on South America, megalithic Europe. Here's one on China. And I was doing them at community centers. La Peña and Berkeley hosted a lot of my shows. I did a whole entire series there. And here's another brochure, and really trying to show the range, because people very quickly sort of fixated on, oh, she does goddesses, she does matriarchy. And it's like, no, colonization and enslavement and all of these political factors very much tie in to women's history. So there I am with my camera. This is like 1979. And what happened, this is me right over on this left side, but then I broke into the universities in 1980, and it was kind of hard to get in. I didn't have any degrees, and to be able to come as a guest speaker to universities. So I had to kind of fem it up a little bit, dress up in my very, very best clothes that I could lay hands on. And then I would come home after, March was Women's History Month. So that was kind of like my chronological ghetto, that I could get bookings in March to do talks. And then I would come back and I would do my house cleaning jobs or my elder care, or whatever it was I was doing that really was paying the rent, because none of this other stuff really was. And it was expensive to travel, and I had to pay the airfare and all that stuff. So here's an example of, this was one of my coups, because in 1984, I got invited to do a series at UC Berkeley. And all of that went away. At a later time, we can talk about that. But I did a series, so in the Southwest, the Women of Power show, Southern Africa, China, just to really show in a really global way. And this was a brochure that I did around that time. And so here's another brochure, because I'm mailing these out to the women's centers and universities and beating the bushes trying to get bookings. And, that was kind of the 80s and the 90s was the period where it was possible to do that. Later on in the early 2000s, the portcullis slammed shut and I couldn't get booked to do that. Women's history was no longer even in the least bit fashionable. So that became I had to go back to the grassroots, which I had really started in and never really left. So in the meanwhile, the San Francisco Women's Building, I did a bunch of events there in the 80s, but it got too expensive. I couldn't afford what they began to charge for the rooms. But this was from their newsletter. And so I wrote these articles. This one's about Balunda and Baluba women's leadership positions. And you can see that it appears bilingually. So we translated it into Spanish. And here's another series at the Women's Building in San Francisco on some other topics. So you can see the range of it. And then this was in 1983, I was invited to present Suppressed Histories of the Americas as a visual talk at an Indigenous women's art exhibit in San Francisco. So there was a lot of collaborative things like that. And then as time goes on, Changemakers for Women was sort of the heir to Mama Bears, which was a women's bookstore in Oakland. And I did this show on patriarchy. So this is the kind of hipster snark that I sent a notice to the East Bay Express to get it in their calendar. And so they did a write-up on it, which was in a way a good thing because it was more publicity, but it was so hostile. Well, don't let guys get away with anything. It's like, look at the stuff I'm talking about, these horrible kinds of violence, and you're going to joke about it. So the climate in the 2000s became pretty backlashy.
Max, Vanessa was asking if the newsletters are available in any form, because she'd like to read them.
They might be somewhere. The Women's Building would be the people to inquire with. I just have a few copies of things somewhere buried in my archives. I mean, I kept everything, but I don't know where it all is. And I'm not really sure, in terms of archives, there's the Bay Area Lesbian Archives, but they're just sort of getting started, and they don't have my stuff, I don't think, and I doubt that they have the Women's Building stuff, but a lot of this was lesbians who were running all of this. So just a couple of more things here. We can go back off the slides for a little while. I also was doing art. I'm an artist, and so it was really important to be able to. There were a lot of really great stories. Like this one was a Hellenic writer talking about in Asia Minor how women would do fire walking and walk over the flames. And so I tried to envision, what an Anatolian priestess in that time period would have looked like. This was actually developed. I did it for the Woman Shaman DVD. This is another one that I did in about 1980, because there were these great traditions out of Zimbabwe about medicine women, essentially. The Python healer, Harinda Baroswe. And there's a whole tradition about her. I guess she was a princess. Her father was deadly ill. He promised the heirship to the kingdom to whoever could cure him. His sons couldn't do it. She allowed the python to coil around her, and she acquired this healing power, and she cures her father. And the python gives her this moonstone. Now, I have no idea what any of this looks like. This is just my attempt to visualize it based on, like, the bead patterns and stuff like this come from more modern images out of Southeastern Africa. But to try and bring forward into a visualized way these cultural worlds. And as I was saying, maps was also part of that. And so I did a map of architecture in Africa here. And this map was done in the period with Donna Deitch. We were going to take little cutouts, because there was nothing digital at that time. We're going to take little cutouts of the ancient female figurines in the regions they were found in. And we were going to paste them onto this map, and we were going to film it, kind of pan and zoom across the planet to show kind of an overview of the female presence, essentially, in archaeological finds. And we never got that far, but I have the map still. So I'm going to stop screen share here, and we can come back to some more images later on if you want.
Well, Max, we probably have maybe about 10 or so minutes for the rest of our time. So yeah. I have a couple things. One, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your workshop that's going to be a part of our series. I know the title of it is Pagan Herbal Traditions of Europe.
Yes.
And because we're an herbal group, we're really interested in that topic. And I'm wondering, we're going to spend 3 hours focused on that. Could you just give us a couple sneak previews of what you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, I just put together a course about that this year. I mean, and this is a lot of what I covered in Witches and Pagans, was really trying to dig out not only the healing traditions, but also the sacred traditions around the herbs. And so, for example, uses of herbs, well, just not even uses, that's really the wrong word, but you know, the approach to the plant, the knowing of the plant, the speaking to plants, the invoking of the plant's powers. There were chants, for example, in Anglo-Saxon tradition, 1100 years ago, there was something called the Lachnunga, and it contained something called the 9 herbs charm in Old English. And the very first charm, the very first herb is mugwort, Artemisia. And the interesting thing about this plant is it was sacred and used in the same ways, maybe not ceremonial in the same ways, but for the same purposes in North America, in Europe, and in China. So all of those traditions, desert sage is in that family, mugwort is in that family, and then you've got Chinese moxibustion, that's the same plant. So they're using it to clear negative energies from people's body mind, right? So in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, they're calling her Una. You are called Una, oldest of herbs. And they're talking about her power to remove infection and affliction. And they actually make this interesting analogy of disease to conquering warlords. So that's very interesting. But mugwort was also extensively used. There was usually 9 herbs that were gathered at the midsummer holiday. So all over Europe, it didn't matter if you were in Spain or Russia or Britain, people were gathering certain herbs on the longest day of the year, and they would be up all night dancing around the bonfire. And they would take the herbs and weave them into garlands that they would be wearing as dancers. And then they would also bring to the ceremony the garlands that they took home, they would hang up to protect their house and their barns, their animals. They would take those old dried up wreaths and they would throw them into the bonfire. So it was like getting rid of all the collected negative energy from the previous year. And then they would, have these fresh new ones. They'd take them home and they'd protect their houses. They'd bless their houses with them. Of course, there's a lot of different healing traditions, and not only the herbal ones, but also things, well, smoking people is certainly herbal, and not only with mugwort, but also kinds of ceremonial acts that are combined with herbs. So we have there are traditions in the penitential books written by the priesthood in the early Middle Ages, scolding everybody and telling them, stop going to the Arioli who are out in the forest somewhere and trying to get cured by them. And when you come to them, they're tying herbs onto your body and they're doing certain kinds of forbidden ceremonies. Don't do this anymore. If you're suffering from a disease, God willed that disease and you just have to suffer it, right? So this really authoritarian written record is actually telling us that there were people in supposedly Christianized Europe who are still doing pagan ceremonies. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be sharing. I have a whole visual presentation that you'll get to actually see some images from, the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century of women binding herbs onto people's bodies or holding up herbs that are used in healing, or just the imagery from a period before where even at that time, the primary healers in Europe were the women herbalists, were the midwives, were the women who not only did medicinal, like the pharmacological side of medicine, but were doing holistic healing with passes over the body of the sick person and with touch, various kinds of, rubbing stones, certain kinds of serpent stones onto the afflicted part of the person's body, or maybe even giving them prescriptions like you need to walk around this lake 3 times. In Scotland, they would gather water from the crest of 9 waves, and that would have a sacred valence of it that would then be used to bathe the sick person. So there's a lot of that ceremonial element that I include in the presentation.
So I'm so
Yeah.
excited about that. And 3 hours spending that time, I'm really taking a deep dive into it. I'm super excited about it. And I noticed there's somebody brought something up that actually I just did research on recently, and I would be curious to hear your perspective. They were saying, have you seen references to using sweetgrass or holy grass in Europe and Asia? We know that it's used by the indigenous native people in the northern hemisphere, but have you seen it used by the Celts or any of the
I don't know.
other?
Does sweetgrass even grow in Europe? I don't know that.
Yes, and that's
Oh.
the research I did recently, is I found that it is a European tradition as well. And
Oh,
again, those patterns, it was utilized very similarly to the way that the
interesting. I hadn't come across that. That's really interesting to know.
yes, very it fascinated me because I always thought it was just a North American indigenous tradition, and
Me
actually
too.
it's a shared tradition across and different species, but same genus of sweetgrass that grows here.
Okay.
So yeah.
Um,
So I want to, because we're going to be winding down a little bit, there's one question I really wanted to ask you. And it's a little out of order, but I still want to ask it. Along this path, I mean, you've been on quite a journey and you've done so much research. Are there one or two things you could share with us that have really surprised you along the way, or just really, really caught your attention that that were really profound moments in your journey?
you warned me you were going to ask that, and I forgot to, to bring it up. I mean, there are many times. There are many times. I mean, I can't even begin to think. But there are discoveries that really blew me away. I was reading some texts that were, I don't know, was Leo Frobenius, some German or English traveler in West Africa, and he came up with these incredible stories about a tungutu. This was their word for the medicine woman, or for the ceremonial priestess, who was the most powerful of all the spirit healers. And the story comes around this idea of not only could they heal, but they had the power to bring back from the dead. So there's this whole account of how she does this by going into an ecstatic state. And so she dances, and there's the musicians, and they're singing the song, and it's raising the power. And she ascends, and she shapeshifts in the sky, and she becomes this winged bird, and she lowers her wings over this dead ram that belonged to the king. That was like the whole power of the kingdom was in this ram, and it died, and he wanted it back. And so she does this, and she lays over it for a very long time. And when she pulls the wings back, the ram leaps up and it's alive. And there's a couple stories like this. There's from Korea. I have a whole article about this that's going to be on the Suppressed Histories website that's about medicine women who revive from the dead. Story is told about Isis. She revives Osiris, very much also in the form of a bird. So you've got this kind of Pan-African bird power tradition, and also in Korea and other places. So those kinds of stories, and I went through a whole North Asian period, because some of the areas that are the most interesting are places that you never ever hear about anything. The only thing we hear about North Asia is that the Russians exiled people to Siberia, which is what Siberia is they're referring to the whole northern part of the biggest continent, And so there's some amazing female shamans, where the word comes from, actually, from the Tungus cultures in that region. And to see these pictures of these women with these giant frame drums, upon which they have painted the spirits of the land and sea and air in their visions, their ancestral beings, their helping spirits, and just even reading about them doing these ceremonies and going into ecstasy, and then knowing things, knowing what plant, knowing maybe what the ancestors want to be done. What is the solution for the problem, whether it's an illness or, a conflict or whatever it may be, and bring back that wisdom from their trance state. And a whole vast body, not of one culture, but of interlocked cultures, The Mongolians had this, the Tuvans in Central Asia, this whole sphere of cultures that had something that was considered very much a threat by the states. You know, this is not priestly authority. This is something that comes directly from spirit. And so that really enchanted me. You know, I think I first came across it reading Mircea Eliade's book, Shamanism, which is extremely patriarchal text, racist too. But, you know, he was just always trying to prove, well, you know, there are all these traditions with the Norse and these different places that about female shamans, but don't pay any attention to that because it was really originally male hunters that began this whole form of knowledge. You know, that was his position. And so, like, you know, this is the other thing I would say to anybody is that you are going to find clues. You're going to find a fragment, a nugget, and you can pursue that nugget because it's probably being presented to you wrong. It's not the actual story. It's coming through a biased source, and you have to kind of like follow the thread, and maybe the thread will end. Maybe you'll never find any more than that one nugget. But what I've seen over the years is something that I found that was turned out it was only one little piece that was vouchsafed unto us by, you know, the white male authorities. They mentioned this one piece and they left out a whole other chunk. And you guys, well, there's this whole thing there. There's an entire tradition of this, or a group of interrelated traditions. And so there's a skepticism, I think, to feminist scholarship to realize that about the way things are presented to us and the picture they paint and what's behind that, you know, and you know, what can we follow? How can we trace these lineages? And a lot of it's gone. When I began, I just thought, that's it, they've destroyed it all. You know, we have such a severe patriarchy, it's all gone. And then I started finding these pieces and then more. And then you come to find out that there are living traditions that are still holding this knowledge, that are wisdom keeping traditions. And so, you know, foregrounding those voices, a lot of the approach that I'm taking is to find those books, those videos, you know, there's all these things that are coming forward. And that's why I say everything I do is provisional. You know, you have to always check it against, you know, you get better access to the real cultural authorities, you know, or maybe those people were dead for 30,000 years and you're never really going to get a direct line. But you can look at the iconography and you can see something and it corresponds more because then you start to see the patterns coming through and you realize, wow, there's really something here about ancestor reverence. There's really something here about the ways people use to heal, the way they approach sacred trees or the sacred waters. You know, that is something very profound about being human. That is, you know, it's sometimes things are carried about from place to place and, you know, religions spread that way, but other things arise independently because they have to do with some kind of fundamental truth about what the world is and who humans are in the world and how we relate to it. So the frog in the moon, or, you know, the snake in the waters, there are certain themes that come through over and over and over.
So we have two things real quick from the chat. If you know where to see the drums and ceremonies of those Siberians, are you able to share where people can see those images?
I'm sorry, for which images? I started looking.
The ceremonies of the Siberians with the drums.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, you can actually now do an image search. Shaman Yakut or Shaman Saha, Shaman Siberia, Mongol. Just figure out the names of those indigenous nations and then do a web search and you'll find all kinds of stuff. And some of them are 18th century drawings by Russian ethnographers and some of them are 21st century. You know, the Soviets tried to stamp this out. You know, it was considered backwardness. And so they had a real struggle, but there's a revival that's been going on, which is true of indigenous societies globally, of bringing back the language, bringing back the old ways. And so there's a lot out there to be found. And, you know, I'm a big believer in triangulating searches. Like if you can come up with 2, 3, 4 search words, put it in Google image, you'll be amazed at what you can find now.
And then there was one.
Videos of actual ceremonies.
There was one other thing here.
But watch out for the New Ager,
For the what?
for the New Agers. You know, there's a lot of very distorted market-driven presentations of what purports to be indigenous tradition that, or, you know, in some way allied with it, that's really about money making and stereotypes. So you want to try and find the real thing. You know, and then that goes also from the feminist angle, because a lot of it, like when I was doing the Woman Shaman DVD, I'm looking up medicine woman, witch, shaman, priestess, all these categories, and there's all these pornified images of
Yeah.
huge breasts thrusting them out and these pouting looks, and just really, I mean, very distorted. It's very, very far from what it is they purport to actually depict. You know.
I need to weed that out.
Yeah, you know, you have to sort through it.
Vanessa was asking, who is the author of Shamanism? Was
Oh,
it?
Mircea Eliade. I'll type it here in the chat.
Oh, here, no, somebody typed it in. I see it. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So we've got
And
that.
then also, you know, because that's where I got turned on to the Wu. So in the Chinese tradition, I have articles about this on the website. You know, I think I better just try to remember this and type it in for you, because I don't think it's linked from the website. But so presshistories.net articles 2.wu.html. I think that's it. No, not .wu /wu.html. That'll take you to that article, because it's just like again, he was trying to de-emphasize the fact that the core tradition of spiritual leaders in ancient China was female. The Wu, the character for Wu it's a female linked character. And the character for male shamans has that character in it, along with another radical that means male. So that's like a whole dimension, because this is another example about, I looked and looked for years and years and I couldn't find anything about Chinese women that was not patriarchy. And it turns out there's this vast amount of stuff, not only from the ancient Wu traditions, but in the Taoist tradition. And so I do have one linked article. If you look under the articles link on suppresshistories.net, you'll find one. I think it's about Xi Wangmu, you could call her the great goddess of ancient China. But the Wu article, I don't believe is linked, so you can get that in there.
So I know we're going to transition. Somebody was asking about the images on your wallpaper, and I know the images, there are a lot of different images on your wallpaper. Are those images that people can find at the at the archives?
You know, because the Suppressed Histories Archives went nonprofit, I took off posters. I just put the valletta.net, that site, oops, I just sent it to one person that messaged me. Let me try that again. Everything I typed in here went to one person. Okay, I don't know how it reverts that way, but the Valletta site, the posters are there. So here's that. Whoops. Here's Valletta. That's a poster I did. I call it a one-page book. This is the Female Icons Ancestral Women poster. And it's the ancient female figurines, that one of the first things I started looking for. So I made a poster of it. And there's a couple other posters on the Valletta site. But basically it's to show how international this is. I could pull up the image to show it if you want.
If you want to pull it up, and then we're gonna go ahead and close. And I'm sitting here thinking we need a part 2 of this interview.
Yeah, well, we could do that. You know,
because listening to you, I don't know about anybody else, but I could listen to you for hours.
Okay, hold on a second. Here we go. Just 1 second. I'm pulling it up, and now I need to just do screen share. There we go. Yeah, you should be able to see it now. So basically, you know, I mean, we've got here Morocco, Zimbabwe, China, Mexico. This is very, very international. Here's the Greenland. We've got a bunch from Mexico on here, actually, but also places like Honduras that you never hear about, the Central American cultures. This is Neolithic Iraq, Hungary, El Salvador, Kurdistan, Chile, Brazil, Sudan, Georgia, the state of Georgia, southeast, what is now the United States, Pakistan, Nigeria, Italy. So, you know, it's kind of hard, probably you can make out some of these. Manchuria, what's now part of the Chinese Empire, Peru, India, or really Pakistan, in current borders terms. So just to be able to envision the fact that people had sacral images of the ancestral woman in some of these cultures, maybe they were considered goddesses, but I increasingly come more to the idea that these have to do with the ancestral woman. And that's a continuum, you know, the divine woman in whatever form. So, and maybe someday I'll do another one because there's gazillions more of these, right? So yeah, that's all you'll be able to see that.
Well, I am going to bring our conversation to a close very sadly, because as I said, I could listen to you for hours. And the one thing I want to say to you is I can't express the amount of gratitude I'm sitting here feeling for your life work and the contributions that you've made to history that is so important to us as women and to everyone. And I just can't thank you enough, Max, for dedicating your life to this work. Just thank you so much. And I would like to do a part 2. And I do hope that people will come to your workshop as part of our In Our Own Hands series, because the concept of being with you for 3 hours talking about the pagan herbal traditions also just really jazzes my world. I'm so looking forward to it.
I am too.
So thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Shari because she's going to give away one of your books, and we're going to give away a pass to our series. So we're going to go ahead and do that now, but please, if everybody would just open their mic and I know, Max, that this work is not always easy. It counters, it's hard, it's a dedication. And I would just like, if everybody could open your mic and just say thank you, because I want you to hear all the gratitudes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max.
My
Thank you
goodness.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Max.
Max.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking care of your health, love.
Oops, what happened there? I disappeared for a moment. I was trying to do this.
You did.
Well, and
You
I want
take
to thank
that
you
in.
also for giving me a chance to talk about the archives, because I have not been invited to do this
Thank
history in this
you.
way before. And I appreciate that, because I'm coming from a very marginalized social location with this, you know, and it's I appreciate that.
It
There it is.
matches what we're
Thank
doing
you.
here too. So
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
let's turn it over to Shari.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And bear with me 1 minute. I just lost some of my windows here. Let me get back to my script. So just hang
While
on.
you're looking for that, I just wanted to ask, I didn't get to see the chat at all because I was talking. So if somebody could send me the chat, I'd really appreciate it, because I don't see a place to save it.
And I have
We'll do that, Max.
and I've lost my script, so I'm gonna just go from what we what I've practiced a lot. So now it is time. Well, thank you, Max, and you heard all the thank yous, and I've seen so many comments in the chat. This is important, just as Linda had stated. So at this time, we are going to give away the In Our Own Hands, and let's see. How about we go to Virginia Gillespie. Virginia Gillespie, please go ahead and send an email with your name and that you've won the In Our Own Hands full registration series. That's herbwomen@gmail.com. And now we're going to give away Max's book, and Erica Schultz, there she's waving. You get a free copy of Max's book. And this is really special. We haven't done this on any of the conversations I've been involved in. And Courtney's going to go ahead and type in the PDF link. And this is a link to the chapter of Max's book, Names of the Witch. So chapter 3 from her book, Witches and Pagans. So everybody go ahead and grab that. That is not going to be shared in a link afterwards. That's a special thank you for all of you for joining us live. So
How do
All
you
right.
get that?
It's in the chat. Can you see it in the chat?
Uh,
Copy,
Oh.
paste it from the chat.
So at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says chat, and you click on that, it'll open a
Yes.
window on the right-hand side. And if everybody could just pause for a minute, not to enter anything else, so folks can see that link. And then when everybody's satisfied with that, we'll say our final goodbye. So thank you, everybody. I know this has been really fascinating. I've been looking forward to this for a while. And thank you, Linda, for your vision, and Max for your vision, and all that work for all these years. So has everybody got that link out of the chat?
No.
Yes, thank you so much.
I guess what we could do is, if a couple of the women are struggling, go ahead and put your name, and we'll just send the few of you that are struggling with that an email, personal email with that link. We're not going to send it in a broadcast email with other coupon codes. So if somebody's really struggling, put your name in the chat that you'd like an email, and we'll handle it that way.
41 pages. That's awesome. Thank you again, Max.
Yes, you're welcome. I just thought, I would like to be able to give everything away, but I do have to somehow eke out an existence. So, I thought that chapter was really crucial because the witch has been so demonized. And when you see that the names for witches in all these ethnic languages in Europe mean knower, seer, healer, shapeshifter, herbalist, old woman, all those kinds of names, then a spirit journeyer, it gives a very different angle on it. So we need that knowledge.
Yeah, and your generosity is beyond measure, and hopefully we can all support you and sign up for things that we are paying for, because if we're able to, because supporting you to continue to do this work is an honor. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have my matrone support my work on Patreon. You can find me there and make small monthly donations, or of any size, really.
Wonderful. And in our own hand series, there is a fee for that, and we pay the instructors. So just so people know that's something that is a paid thing that you can contribute to as well. All right. Well, thank you again, Max.
Thank you, Herbal Women hosts.
Yes, just so much love. All right, everybody.
Thank you all.
All right,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you so
Oh,
much,
yeah.
Max.
Thank
This
you.
is magnificent.